now with Alex Ruthmann. He's from New York University. And I just want to say, don't forget to put your name about the workshop you want to do this afternoon. I see some are not very on the list, so just to make sure that everything will be fine for the afternoon. So Alex will talk about designing for creative frictions and freedoms and digital music learning experiences. With that, yes. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation to share some of the work. My background, I'm a professor at NYU in music education and music technology. I'm also a former middle school general music teacher and technology developer. They did turn on my volume. Check it. Talking. Check. All right. How about that? Is that a little better? Okay. Great. So my background, middle school music teacher, but also been involved with designing technologies for a number of years. And 6 years ago, I am close. Right? Okay. I can speak louder. There we go. Okay. Fine. Great. So 6 years ago, I came to NYU and founded the Music Experience Design Lab, showing to Muse Ed Lab, and it does play on the overlap from my perspective between education and experience design. It's great hearing all of these perspectives, primarily from gaming and play. And a lot of the metaphors and language and terminology that's been inspiring my work comes from more of the experience design side of things. There's a lot of overlap here, and a lot of what Faraz was talking about this morning with participatory design has very much influenced our work in the lab. And it's not just me, it's a whole group of people, undergrads through PhD, and then as we have a variety of partner projects that we collaborate on come in and out of the lab, we also work with professional software developers, graphic designers, etc. And what you will be seeing here in my presentation today is going to be some of the getting down and dirty of what we've learned and what we're in the process of learning through these design projects, and what can we learn from designing this work together collaboratively with teachers and students and audience members broadly, and then bring that into education as a process, and that's what my workshop is more this afternoon, about getting into that. But this is a lot of what our work looks like. We play a lot with modeling and with Legos and other physical materials to come up with designs, to get to know our users, to brainstorm ideas, and bring that into that process. Here are some of my undergrad students in China. And here are some examples. A lot of the things that I'm going to be showing you today are interactive websites that we've built for music making and creative play, but we also do work with the physical realm, and working with physical and digital, and also with acoustic instruments. So this was a touch instrument that we co-designed with students in China and students at NYU in Shanghai to kind of explore this concept of Mulan and improvisation and playing with acoustic and digital instruments and designing them together. So that gives you a little window into what we're doing. We've got a number of projects, and again, you can go on to muselab.org and find everything from online learning projects to interactive music making, and that's kind of gets to one of the core things that is behind kind of our ethos in the lab, is that everywhere there's music is an opportunity for music education and for music experience designers to work. And for me, this is why we broadened it out to Music Experience Design Lab rather than education, because we look at working in a variety of spaces, communities, schools, online, all these hybrid spaces in between, and really create the lab as an opportunity for our students in music ed and music tech around to come in and kind of explore outside a lot of these things are outside of or they bridge school music learning. And our main four kind of creative guideposts are play, making, tinkering, and curiosity. I've generally kind of pushed back against gaming metaphors and things like that, because for me, part of this research in designing this is trying to figure out what are the intrinsically motivating aspects of musical experience, of creating and improvising. What can we learn by developing tools that are based around those metaphors to design better and more engaging tools for learning and creation from there. So I'm not necessarily looking at a highly structured domain like gaming and bringing that in. It's like, let's come together and create music. And the other kind of critique, more from the experience design side, is that a lot of design methodology is about removing barriers and making things simple and making them efficient. But if we remove all of our barriers and make things very simple and efficient, we might miss opportunities to learn. And so a lot of what I'll be showing you today are ways that we've played with adding in creative frictions to create these opportunities to learn. Sometimes that's an addition, and sometimes that's an omission, to create a space where the user has to ask questions and to explore the interface, rather than giving them all the directions up front and leading them through a highly sequenced, structured experience. So a lot of our early work in the lab is kind of in this, what we call this design play space between a very young kid's xylophone and Apple's GarageBand. There's a lot of things down for like toys and play and making musical sounds very young, and then you kind of get GarageBand here. And GarageBand is hard for some. It's not the easiest thing to get into for others, and there's a big gap in between there. So our first 5 years at the lab have really been spending time in that space. How can we take something like a GarageBand and create simpler, easier, more engaging ways to get material into that? And then how do we start with children's play patterns and augment them and add sound and creative play and kind of build up into that space? And you'll see a couple of those as we work today. And I'll be specifically walking you through 3 different projects that we've been doing, from an early just weekend hack experience that we created for the Chamber Music Society in Detroit to create a virtual piano duet interface, to a much larger commission working with the New York Philharmonic's Young People's Concerts and building out creative play experiences that go with more of their concert materials. It's more around providing opportunities for kids to compose and get to know the music before the concert. Then they have the concert, they have the experience, and then they can continue to play and create and make it their own after. And then one of our most successful projects called the Groove Pizza, which was born almost 3 years ago and just crossed 1 million pizzas created. So this is something with, when you have 1 million pizzas out there and then the data behind it, it opens up some interesting avenues for research and for looking at friction and freedom and where that goes together. So to kind of, be a bit more concrete about it, these were the musical interfaces that I often inherited when I was starting, and they're very complex. And that complexity and the friction in them and the freedoms they provide are necessary for professionals. You need to have all those degrees of freedom. You bring a lot of knowledge, you need to be able to make that from there. But then the standard approach to developing a lot of music creation apps for younger kids or for learning were to just start there and simplify. And that can create all sorts of challenges kind of in this process. So these are, on one end we have this, and this can be extremely crippling, particularly for novices. But this is also extremely crippling for novices. And this is how most of our music software starts. Blank. A blank page, a blank scene, a blank canvas, and you really have to have a fair amount of confidence in the ideas to start making those first marks and to kind of going in there. So a lot of what we're trying to do is bridge that space. So I'd like to dive in to our little virtual chamber music duet thing. So this was just a hack we put together over the weekend with the executive director of the Chamber Music Society, and he's a piano player. He would often go into kids' concerts at schools and slide down to the left-hand side of the piano and improvise on the black keys, and then invite a kid up to sit next to him on the bench and to play and improvise there. And he was always frustrated that that was only an experience that 2 or 3 kids could have, kind of around that. And he really wanted to have kind of a playful way of kind of engaging with that. So what we did was recorded a video of him that is just set to loop. So we have him playing there, and the design map was to just take the bottom row of the keyboard. Piano samples just limited to 1 row. And one thing we noticed, because this is all living online, is that the kids that we gave this out to were spending 20 and 30 minutes with this loop going on and on and on. And so something that enabled the play was the fact that the music didn't stop. The context kept going. and kind of that kind of work here. But there was also something we wanted to play around with. Did anybody pick up the mapping of the pitches? Is it on here? What do we have? Pentatonic, but is it pure pentatonic? What's no, odd there for the musicians of the group? Yeah. Yeah, and so a lot of our music interfaces for learning often start with the theoretical ideals. Often they're in C and in major with that. Here we're not in it. And we deliberately added in this little dissonance as a friction to kind of spur the creativity. And so when we were starting to play test this, we play tested a version with it and without it. And the kids were playing longer with this little bit in here, and they were spending time because we were able to key track and see what they were doing and play it back. They were spending a lot of time playing around with that dissonance. So as we're thinking about designing these musical experiences, when is it too consonant and too well mapped to the educational ideal that it doesn't open up a little friction? So this is an example of a musical friction that we embedded in that then kind of helps spur some of the play and the engagement kind of going from there with that. So for this, it was really the loop that doesn't end, kind of creating that in and then kind of going from there. From here, we learned and then built this interface because we really liked the idea with kids and that. And this is called the accordion or the QWERTY accordion. And again, this was kind of pushing back against, if you've ever used GarageBand or anything like that, they often map the chromatic piano keyboard to the typing keys. And that would freeze my students because they weren't, maybe the song in their head was in A flat instead of C major. And they couldn't kind of go through it. So here was one where it was about taking advantage of the physical affordance of the keyboard here, and I'll turn the note caps off. But here, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll put it into. I'll take it off of there for now. I'll put it into. We'll do natural there. Yeah. So very functional with that, but then taking advantage of the diagonals on the keyboard to build chords. So the 1, 4 chord, 5. And so now we have kids in 2nd and 3rd grade chording along and finding songs and just kind of playing around with this. So again, it's opening up freedoms there, but at the same time, for another group of end users, having all of that there is a bit of a barrier. So we're trying to play around with different designs that open up and kind of conceal that. The main thing that kind of came from this was an insight from when I was teaching middle school, is that my students wanted nothing more than to play directly with the songs that they love. And so we created the ability to drop in your favorite YouTube video here and see if the internet plays with us. Jam and play and improvise. And so again, it's kind of like, how do we lower these barriers with a simple interface that's familiar, with enough friction to kind of play around and to kind of go with, but then also the freedom to kind of play with something that's motivating and kind of going with it. So we're looking at all of these little, we still look at these as learning experiments that we iterate through, and we're learning, and eventually we'll maybe learn some good things and design some things from it. So it's always a mix, and when you develop a web tool like this that's out there, it's always interesting to see how people use it differently than you think. So that was just a quick one to that, and I guess at this point I can flip over to our groove pizza. This was a project that came from one of our master's students who's now a PhD student, Ethan Hine, in music education at NYU, and he was a frustrated groove drum beat programmer. He didn't like how most interfaces were about putting that in. He didn't like to have. He didn't come reading a whole lot of notation. Now he's perfectly good at it. But here, one thing that he found in his research is we talk a lot in music about loops, but our visual metaphors for representing them are not loops within that. So we normally have this little grid down here to kind of put notes in and kind of play around with. So this was designed as kind of this circular way of playing around with that. And again, just like one of the critiques earlier, we don't start with a blank pizza. We start with an incomplete structure, an incomplete groove. We have here, if I hit play here, you'll see a little bit, but basically each ring is a different drum sound as we go. So I'll go ahead and hit play. And we call it a groove pizza because you can click on it and have your shapes. Kind of play around with it. You can go in here and change the sound to play around with. But the other thing that you'll notice here is that there's no directions on this. So this was a deliberate kind of friction that we were playing with as well. And it's very interesting when we play test this because there's definitely a group of people that want to know how does it work, they're frustrated, they want to do it, but again, we've deliberately left that out there, and as a result, because we didn't do it, now there are tens of YouTube videos that the fan community has created around that, and now we're trying to promote that. So, you know, it's one of these things as we try to play around with what do we bring and what do we not bring, when do we want to promote exploration. But we also want to find ways of hopefully getting people at different levels with this. So still, if I'm going to create with this, I have to have a fair amount of confidence to kind of go in and some musical ideas and some willingness to kind of persist through to kind of create a groove that sounds good. So we needed some other ways of kind of getting into that. So we created these specials in here. And I'll go to one of my favorites, which is Billie Jean. And here, this project actually was commissioned by Herbie Hancock for an initiative called Math, Science, Music. And in our design process, we involved both math teachers and music teachers and students in the process because we were looking at finding a way of bringing this together to kind of playfully explore shape and groove and music and rhythm and angles and all of that together. And so here we have the beat to Billie Jean. What do you notice about the visualization of it? Yeah, it's symmetrical, it's very balanced, it's there. Now compare this with Herbie Hancock's Chameleon. You have a funk. You have the same elements. You have two bass drum hits, you have two snare drum hits, you've got these hi-hats in there that are regular, but the pop beat is very symmetrical. And the chameleon is funky because it anticipates and it delays. And you can play around and start looking at it and making these connections across there. You can still go and choose a plain pizza. But again, it would take a lot of clicks and knowledge. So we needed to find another way to kind of bridge math in a playful way. And so what we discovered through playtesting was that if we take regular polygons and make those as prototypes that we can drag onto the pizza, you can get to, and there's a lot of music theory behind this too, is that you can get to some really good sounding beats and grooves in 2 or 3 drags with this. So I'll go ahead and get the pizza rolling. I'll start here with here. So there's the bass drum ring. Yeah, I'll put 4 on the hi-hat. Bring in 5 here. Play around in this kind of playful way to kind of create this in, and then we started asking questions, what else through this kind of design could we, what are some musical concepts that are maybe we might not think we would get to until high school or college or with that, and how could we bring that down to very young kids? And so one of the ideas around that was to play around with the number of slices in the pizza. So here we've got it divided into 16, but I can go to the slider here. So if I go back here to our specials, here we have a 4-groove track beat. And then it goes to the second pizza, the third. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an overview of some of the things you can kind of create with this. But again, when we were going through the design process, and I'll unpack a little bit of this more with our process in the afternoon, is that we wanted a play experience that's lasted somewhere between 20 seconds and 20 minutes. Kind of a wide range there. But again here, we wanted to, create, there's a reason why we created these 4 pizzas down here, because we wanted them to be able to create a longer musical chunk that was meaningful in the program and to be able to play around with the sequencing and that. But we definitely needed to put a friction in what you could do by eliminating other features, because we were like, oh, we can build this into a full digital audio drum machine and go on with that. But for there, we needed to limit it because we wanted you to be able to just play on this for a little bit and then be able to do something else with it. And this became part of our experience design, is that the core engagement as we look at this was the kind of creation of the beats, but then the success side, or the end, or to use gaming terminology, the win state, is that you were so proud of what you created that you wanted to share it. So we had to create a whole thing in here around sharing, and we wanted to explore a few different ways of doing this. So you can share the link online, you can download this audio and MIDI, but now more and more of these creation environments are going online. So we can create, with one button here, open in Soundtrack. And so Soundtrack is a web-based freemium digital audio workstation. So there's my groove. So from here now, a student can play around in the simplified environment and then now export and now go into the more fully featured complex environment to add their voice, to compose, to kind of work into that and go further. So this was a case where we deliberately constrained the functionality so that they could go into another platform and do that. And just like with the audio, you can also do it here. We built an integration in here, if it's going to load. There we go. Everybody's on. Well, as this loads up, now this puts it into notation on there. And so a lot of the teachers that we were working with needed to have a system to kind of play around with that and then be able to go back and forth to kind of go into that. So we have it, there it is. And so there's our first bar of the Untitled groove to kind of go into that. So we wanted to create this opportunity to share it in a bunch of different formats and then be able to continue to go and play and work from there. And one of the things that Herbie Hancock really wanted, this you get into all sorts of tensions when you're designing with clients and all that, he wanted to display the interior angles. And so we have a bunch of kind of creative math prompts that teachers created from this around creating grooves that explore different numbers of acute versus obtuse triangles, lines, and shapes, and playing around with this as a way of having a groove demonstrate a knowledge and a play of symmetry of playing with these different concepts. That wasn't about having something that was accessible. No, you're going to actually create something from this and then bring it into something, hopefully, that you care about or play along with. So that's a bit from Groove Pizza and that. And then I'll give you a final kind of tour here before I wrap up of some of these young people's concerts, playgrounds that we created. Again, it was a metaphor of a playground rather than a game, even though my colleagues at the field still refer to them as games, and we don't say anything, but it is there. And you can see there's definitely perhaps some good qualities. But again, this was built to live in their young people's concert library where you can watch the young person's concert. This one's around Benjamin Britten's Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra. Interactive videos with their teaching artists, teaching different concepts to learn from, and then at the end is a variation playground that you can then click into. I'll just click into this one first. And these three were developed over time and in order, and the design and what we learned from them changed dramatically kind of with this. So the first prototypes that we inherited before getting into this project, the students had to think through all the Italian terms first and all the directions before getting into the experience. So when we first did this, you went right into the creation experience, but we realized you needed something to kind of get started. So here we provided choice to, you can, and again, not major in there. So this was kind of inspired by musical puzzle cards and composing and working with this, where you're exploring different shapes mapped to different sections of the theme. And you can come in here and explore. But again, where are the directions? It doesn't quite say, so it's promoting that. But one of the things that we kind of worked around with was adding this question mark. And so right now, you don't have anything, you click on these and you can hear them. And then you can drag them down into the hair and you can create your own variations. But if you click the question mark, you then get a legend or a map or a key to the way that we've mapped these different things to get an understanding of it. And then if you need to know more, it opened up these ellipses. And then it gives you this information. So this is deliberate design and friction into getting that to hopefully get the kids to explore and do that rather than going, how do I do this and how do I do it well and be correct with that. And frankly, the demands from some of the teachers we were working with were wanting to have a lot of that there too. So again, this is one of the ways we were trying to find to kind of balance this work. So this one's built around card sorting and kind of playing and kind of creating one that way. A younger interface was built around, we developed this around Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream. And again, you're given this kind of magical play space. This was about exploring Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream and music in the daytime being different from music in the nighttime and kind of have a creative space. So here, we brought a little bit of direction in there, dragging you to explore the music. So you can click, or if you have the iPad. Actually created a recording of my drawing and captured my process. So I can play that back and listen to it. And so my movements were recorded as a composition in a very kind of easy way. This one is about exploring kind of rhythmic density and high register and low register, moving into music in the nighttime, which for this is the dynamic. So this takes kind of a drawing, painting metaphor, and then creates this playful experience where as they move, they create sound and explore, and then they can go in if they want to, and kind of learn a bit about the logic of how that's been put together. That ended up with our final kind of metaphor was one we built around Dvorak's New World Symphony. And again, here was a slightly different thing. We didn't want to start with a blank canvas, but again, one of the things that we learned from this is we wanted to give the user kind of choice on the level of friction that they had going in. Did they want to start with a completely blank canvas to create with? Or did they want to start with a fully completed one that they could remix? Or maybe they want to start with create a beginning or create an ending to kind of play around with this. So I'll show you the remix one. And we're given a musical landscape here. We have 6 themes from Dvorak's New World Symphony. And we can take these and bring them into our canvas here. I'll turn this up so you can see this. Each different lane or column across is a different tonal area with the composition. And then you have foreground to middle ground to background with it. So if I click up here, you have that, and I can change the sound. And if I move it to the middle ground, the rhythm gets a little faster, and in the background it becomes an ensemble. So I'm going to bring another one up here, and then we can click on this to kind of hear and put that together. But it's basically this interface to start playing with these themes and combining and recombining them, kind of to create your own 5th movement of it, and then you can watch it across here, save it. You'll be able to also eventually open this up in Note Flight, open it up in Soundtrack as well. And then of course you can then come in and create your own harmonic journey and play with the new one. If you didn't like that one to kind of play around with. But so these are showing some of those kind of developments with here. We still brought this in with here. And another one of those kind of freedom friction conversations we're having in our work is how do we, with these kind of web-based things, if you've ever done any of this work, it's really hard to maintain a community of users if you're the developer, and if you're a teacher, how do you share in ways with this? So we've played around with a bunch of different ways around that, and that's what our little share button is here, where anybody can go in and add a description or a content or comment with that, and then this opened up here, and then you can just take the link and share it. So we have a number of people using this with Google Classroom to embed in and share and kind of do it. And the cool thing is that once you type this in, if that's your link, you can save it, but if you send that to your teacher or a friend, then your little description comes up front. And if they're then able to kind of play with it, but it creates a brand new version for them and it doesn't destroy yours. So we're trying to create these simpler ways on our end. I mean, it's making it simpler for us to manage, but also what's that kind of minimum kind of build out that we need to help it still be social and shareable as we work through these. So with that in mind, I'm going to come back to some of the things that we're thinking about from the research point of view. And this is one of the core things that we've been influenced by is Nathan Shedroff's work from experience design, where he's talking about good experiences have three main kind of things. They have an attraction, something that brings you into it, and then there's the core engagement. And there's a lot of different ideas around what makes a good engagement, but then there's also some conclusion. There's some personal sense of satisfaction at the end that you either want to share it or you feel completion, because if you get into it and it's there and you don't have an ending, that can also kind of work with that. And then this was inspired by earlier work that I did with Steve Dillon and Andrew Brown with a tool called Jam to Jam. That was a similar thing. It was actually the metaphor that inspired the Mendelssohn moving around, which was this collaborative, audio-visual jamming interface but it was connected over a network. So I would go on here and maybe I would be the piano, and I could move around in visual transformations, audio transformations, and maybe you were in Australia and you got into my room and you were the guitar. And we could kind of improvise and play together. And the research that came out of that was a framework they developed called meaningful musical engagement, which came from studying these musical interactions, not gaming, not play, but looking at these kind of music things. And for these experiences to be successful, they needed to be successful